Welcome to this April 12th edition of the Courier Paperboyz. I'm Doug Newhoff, and I'm joined today by our Murderers Row of sports writers, Jim Sullivan, Jim Nelson, and Nick Pateros. Some things going on up at UNI this morning, Nellie. Kurt Warner and the NFL Network were in town to film a segment for, I think it's called their Back to Campus special. I don't know a whole lot more about it. Talked a little bit about it with some people last week, and I guess it was kind of a under the radar type of thing. They wanted to get in and get out before people found out too much about it. But you were up there this morning and got a chance to hear a little bit more about it. Fill us in.
You know, it was a great time for a great to see Kurt and DeAndre, and basically what it was is DeAndre and him were going to go on a tour of campus, and they were going to talk, and Kurt's
DeAndre Hall.
DeAndre, what did I call?
Oh, you just didn't say something.
All right, Kurt and DeAndre walk around campus, and it was a chance for Kurt to get DeAndre more, the NFL get to know DeAndre Hall more, and it was he's one of several personalities from the NFL Network doing. I think Deion Sanders was going to Florida State, and I can't remember who else he said, but Kurt was happy to be back, very gracious, and he talked a lot about, very glowingly about DeAndre and what the process is going to be, and you know, so we got him for about 20 minutes. I'm still transcribing all the notes. We got a lot of good stories where we talked a little about everything. And, you know, Kurt's got a son that's recruitable. You know, he said he's in touch with Mark quite frequently, but they haven't broached that idea yet.
What's the purpose or the goal of this series that the NFL's doing?
Really just to get their personalities back on campus, and for, I think what Kurt said about this is giving a spotlight onto DeAndre that maybe otherwise he would not have gotten, and a chance to, you know, to get to know this guy that people are going to hear about on draft day, whether it's first, second, third, fourth, fifth round or whatever, and when his name's called, people are going to get to know who DeAndre Hall is, and I think that's kind of what it was, just to get their personalities back on campus.
And how did they decide, where they were going to go and which kids they were going to feature?
Well, I'm thinking with their personalities, it had to be, you know, obviously Kurt was going to go to UNI, and Deion Sanders was going to go to Florida State, and God, I don't want to say...
We're not asking you any more questions this morning.
I'm just stumbling over that. I'm all over. Not enough Mountain Dew, I guess, this morning. But anyway, so it was just to get them back on their campus, and I think that was the point of the whole thing, was to get them back on campus, a little bit different thing, and a little different. It's going to air later this month before the draft, I believe, and they didn't give that timeline yet when that's going to happen, but they said it was going to be before the draft.
Well, all in all, it sounds like a pretty cool deal and good exposure for the Panther program. You know, they're also into the second week of their spring drills. You've been up there a couple times and had a chance to talk with Coach Farley quite a bit. Any surprises, setbacks, developments? What's going on with Panther football?
Well, I was there Saturday for 3 hours, watched them practice. Nothing significant on the injury front at all, other than the Nixon and it's a couple of guys with pulled hamstrings that can keep out a couple of days, you know, twisted ankles and stuff like that. They haven't done a lot of live tackling or anything. Coach told me they're going to do that this Saturday. They're going to probably go live a little bit and tackle some. But other than that, you know, they're still trying to figure out guys. You know, they have a couple volunteer assistants on there to help them out. You know, Chad Reinhardt's back on campus after his NFL career. He's helping with the offensive lineman. He was in particular with all the injured guys, but the starters, the Robert Rathke and the Cal Twaits and the Trevor Hansons, and so Chad Reinhardt was working with them, and then Todd Sturdy, the former assistant at Iowa State, and he was offensive coordinator at Washington State. He's been volunteering really on the offense, and he was very active with them on this past Saturday, helping out the offense, especially the quarterbacks, working with Aaron Bailey and Dalton Demos and Eli Dunn and Reggie Schulte. You know, getting those guys prepared for next year. So I thought Coach said they're going to evaluate whether to bring those guys full-time onto staff here after the spring, but those are two guys we could see on the staff next year.
Well, hopefully one of them can inject some life into that passing game. That's one area that definitely needs to improve next season. Speaking of college football, Sully, you've had a chance to interact with the Cyclones here several times this spring, including new coach Matt Campbell. Kind of what are your impressions so far, and where are things at Iowa State?
From a public relations standpoint, he's doing about as well as you could expect for a first-year coach. He's, as you could say, winning the spring, so to speak. He's done a couple of things I think are incredibly smart and creative, one of which was reaching out to Dan McCarney, bringing him back for a visit last weekend. It connects with some of the best things that have happened in Iowa State over the last 20 years. It builds a bridge where one I don't think existed in the past. And anytime you have Dan McCarney speaking to your team, it's about to get people fired up.
Yeah.
So that was good. He's been very accessible to the media. We've met with him at least once a week for the past several weeks. His assistants have been very accessible, and I haven't talked to all of them, but the vast majority of the ones I've talked to have been very good with the media, very articulate, very relaxed. It's for most of them, it's not the first rodeo. I mean, Mr. Haycock, for instance, has been around. He coached in Valley football at Youngstown State, so he knows the ropes. And there's a good mix of young and old there, of people with a Toledo background, people who have had a lot of experience like Haycock. So I think they've done well in that regard. Now, you can't expect too much or too many answers out of spring ball, I don't think, with Iowa State, because he's still evaluating the personnel. They're still trying to figure out who can do what the best. I don't think we'll see any great surprises out of the spring game. When do you see any great surprises out of a spring game? So the evaluation process will continue through this and into summer workouts and fall camp. But so far, I think he's done all the right things. Now all he's got to do is get ready for fall and try to win some games.
All right, let's shift gears and move over to the NBA. The big story, of course, is Golden State. They're on the cusp of setting an NBA record for the most wins in a regular season. They won 3 big games last week, including 2 over kind of their arch rival San Antonio, to set this up for Wednesday night when they host Memphis. They're 72-9. They win. They're tied with the 96-97 Bulls.
I think so, that's right. Well, we're right in that area, either 95-96 or 96-97.
95-96, there you go. They had 72 wins, so they're tied with them right now. If they win tomorrow night, Wednesday night, they'll set the record with 73 wins. I was just kind of curious where this ranked with some of the other greatest seasons in professional sports history, so I looked up a few of them. Obviously, we all know about the 72 Dolphins that went 17-0 in the NFL and won the Super Bowl. One I wasn't aware of was the Montreal Canadiens. In 1976 and 77, they went 68-12 during an 80-game regular season, and I think they set a league record with 132 points that year, and went on and won the Stanley Cup, so that was a pretty impressive season. Certainly there are some college basketball seasons that have been pretty incredible. Most of them by UCLA under John Wooden back when they were 30-0 on a kind of a regular basis. And then most recently Indiana in 1976 when they went, was it 28-0, I think it was.
30-0 somewhere in there, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. But and then of course on the women's side, UConn, just in the last 3 years, 2 of those 3, they're 38-0 one year and they're 40-0 another year, so that's another team that kind of stands out. Major League Baseball, you'll like this, Nick. Your 1906 Chicago Cubs won 116-36.
Back when they were a dynasty in
That
the
is
early
amazing.
1900s.
And then, you know, you on a more modern level with Major League Baseball, the 1998 Yankees were 114-48. That winning percentage was .704. But and we had a minor league team here once for the Kansas City Royals in 1975 that went 93-35. So that was a team that had a pretty incredible percentage too. But these Warriors, 73-9, would be a winning percentage of .877 over what is a pretty long season, an 82-game NBA season, in a league where there's so much talent. I mean, I just think in this day and age, to accomplish what they've done is just really an incredible story.
Especially with them being in the Western Conference. You look at the teams out there, just the other night they beat San Antonio on their home court, and that was the first home game the San Antonio Spurs have lost all season. So that's impressive in that closing stretch. And you've got, you know, Oklahoma City with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook out there, the LA Clippers, some really good teams in the West that they've been able to beat.
There's a couple of interesting angles. The some are good, some are not. The Spurs are always kind of fun to watch in this situation because you don't know what Greg Popovich is up to. I believe he rested Duncan on Sunday night. He's done that in the past, and it really irritates some people, but I think he has a long-term plan in mind, specifically aimed toward the playoff and a possible matchup with the Warriors. I think I said this before, I wouldn't be surprised if San Antonio knocks them off in the playoffs. but he just seems to keep it interesting. He seems to want to keep people off balance as much as he can, and certainly I think Golden State is part of that. The other thing that's kind of unfortunate, I think, is that this discussion always comes up of what if these Warriors play the 95-96 Bulls? And we seem to hear this ad nauseum. Scottie Pippen was saying that they could sweep, and and I don't care. They're not going to play. Your time is done. You're over. You're yesterday's news. Just sit back and watch the parade, and let them have their time. This is the Warriors' time. This is the Spurs' time, not yours. Just let it happen.
But modern society demands that we have a best team of all time.
Yeah, I know, and you can't do that.
It's hard to relate with eras. I mean, it's different. It's a different game now than it was even, back in the 95, 96.
Well, we grew up with that, us guys on this end of the
Yeah,
table,
this
grew
one.
up with those old Bulls teams, and man, they were fun.
They were
to
good.
watch.
There's no question about that. They were good. You could go back to the Celtics teams of the 60s with Bill Russell and Sam Jones, K.C. Jones, Havlicek.
Some of the old Laker teams.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good teams in there. It's hard to compare teams from one era, especially you go back half a century, to teams now because of the rule changes, the changes in depth, expansion, air travel, and so on. It's a tough thing to do.
I'm so old that I remember when the New York Knicks were good.
I do too. I remember
Dave
Willis Reed and
DeBusschere,
yep.
and Walt
Absolutely.
Frazier, and Phil Jackson. I mean, they had some great teams there for a stretch.
Speaking of the NBA and the team that I followed went through the 80s, last week, the Philadelphia 76ers, their GM finally resigned, our team president, I think he had 8 titles, Sam Hinkie. And he staunchly defended his policy where he has tanked the last 3 seasons. They've had the worst record in the league the last 3 years. He's drafted 2 guys that haven't played a game for him. He's just stockpiling all these top draft choices. I mean, what do you guys think about this? What's he saying? He's staunchly defending. His thing was the process. They hadn't been playing against vacant stadium inside the Wells Fargo Arena in Philadelphia. Their corporate sponsors could not have been happy with this. I can't believe that the ownership would be on board with a process. I don't know when the process was actually going to turn out positive for this guy. What did you guys read into this or thought about it?
It's kind of like I really don't care what happens in Philadelphia
Yeah.
with the 76ers. I mean, there are better stories in the NBA, and
It's just amazing that somebody could tank that way.
Well, sooner or later, you have to win. You're not there to lose games. Sooner or later, you have to translate the talent into success. Otherwise, you don't have a franchise, and I think that's the case before. The other interesting part is, and talk about being old enough, I remember being old enough when the 76ers won a grand total of 9 games in a season. That was 40 years ago. And I remember they drafted, right around that time, a guy out of Wisconsin named Al Henry, who no one had ever heard of before he was drafted, and no one ever heard of him after he was drafted because he didn't last. So they have this strange history there where either they're great or they're terrible. They were great when they had Wilt Chamberlain. They were great when they had Moses Malone. They were pretty close to great when they had Allen Iverson, and there's been these periods that just been terrible in the middle. And we're going through one of those periods now, and they're making some changes there. I think enough is enough. They're going to decide, we're going to get serious about this, build a team, and then we'll see what happens.
I think if you look at the team that's built the right way, it's what the Timberwolves are doing. They trade Kevin Love to get Wiggins in. You have got Rubio, a young player that's finally starting to come around, and then they draft Karl Anthony Towns, who's going to be a star in the league. I think that's more of a model for success than what the Sixers are trying.
All you got to do is keep them together. That's going to be the challenge going forward.
what I really like about the Warriors is that I think it's a team in the true sense. I think it's the Golden State Warriors featuring Stephen Curry. And I contrast that to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I think they'll never win the big one because it continues to be LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's not, it's all about LeBron. I mean, it starts with him, and he wants to run the team, and he wants to be the man, and he wants to take all the shots, and he wants to make all the decisions, and the dynamic just doesn't work that way like it does for Golden State with their team-first philosophy. So, interesting stuff. Let's talk a little Major League Baseball. Not too many surprises in the opening week. The Cubs are who we thought they'd be. The Royals are pulling out some late inning wins, including several at the expense of our Minnesota Twins. The Braves are just as bad as the Twins. I don't think either one of those teams has won yet, correct?
That's right, I think 0-13 combined.
Yeah, a couple of interesting storylines are the 6-0 Baltimore Orioles. I certainly didn't see that coming after watching a couple of the games or listening against the Twins to start the season. And then this kid from Colorado, Trevor Story, 7 home runs in his first 6 big league games. So there's been some good storylines and some that I guess aren't too surprising.
That's really true. The Cubs, for all the reasons we thought have been interesting to watch, they pulled a big one last night over the Cincinnati Reds, and everything's going great except for the fact that they lost Schwarber. The hype, as we've discussed before, is going to be incredible. I mean, it's already incredible. It's going to get, to make a Spinal Tap reference, it's going to be up to 11 on a scale of 10. And so that'll be fun to watch. And the Cardinals are getting some traction finally. I don't think they're going away. The Pirates are good. The one team we haven't heard a lot about that's really kind of surprising is the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees, for one of the few times that I can remember, have sort of come off the radar screen a little bit. Although, that'll change at one point or another. But and the Orioles, I watched plenty of them, and they've got some talent. Their pitching staff, they look like Cy Young against the Twins, so that I'm not sure how much to read into that. But our team is not looking good. They're about to set a world record for strikeouts.
5 for 55 with runners in scoring.
That's not going to get it done. And, I think I made a prediction that they'll win more games than the 76ers. But
That's really going on.
that's going on a limb, I know, but they're not there yet. They're still stuck at 0, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. The other thing off the field that there's been a lot of grumbling about is the Utley rule regarding the takeout slides at second base or anywhere, I guess, on the base paths. But, I don't look at this so much as being something new as more being an emphasis on enforcement. I mean, what do you guys think?
Seriously, I mean, the big one last week was Jose Bautista, and that cost the Blue Jays a game. To me, I listened to this on talk radio, the MLB network, over and over. I think every host they had a 2-hour segment on it. But to me, these guys claim that he didn't reach out and grab the guy's leg, where to me it looked like he reached out and grabbed the guy's leg. I mean, intentionally it looked like he was trying to take his legs out. And
that's always been against the rules.
Yeah, and so it was called. It was finally called, and now they're mad that it was called. So
I just always thought that if your intention with your slide was to take out the fielder as opposed to get to the base, which we've all seen the rolls that they do to 3 feet out of the baseline and the slides that they don't even have a chance of touching the base. I mean, that's an illegal play and it should be called. I just think now they're enforcing it.
Yeah, and it just comes down to an adjustment in coaching now. They have to coach them to slide to the bag instead of trying to take these players out. And it'll be better for the game because you want to see the best middle infielders, out there instead of on the DL.
And nobody's saying that you should take out the takeout slide. I mean, if it's a legitimate bang-bang play and the ball's at second base and the guy's on the bag and you arrive at the bag at the same time and you take him out, that's fair game. That's baseball. Nobody's saying that that's illegal.
The one that was odd, that people have a hard time understanding aside from the Bautista play, was the Brewers-Astros play that ended the game, I think it was Friday night. And that, to me, looked like it was a perfectly legitimate play, nothing wrong. But I'm not sure what the umpire's interpretation was, but that was fairly controversial as well. But the Bautista one, he clearly reached out and grabbed him. I mean, I don't think there's any, the people on MLB were kind of fit about that, but I don't see how you can justify that play, where he obviously reaches out, grabs his foot, and impedes his progress.
Right.
So there's nothing to be seen there. I think they'll make an adjustment. They'll figure out a way to be consistent with the enforcement, and we'll be fine as time goes on.
Let's hope so. Baseball has more pressing issues than worrying about whether or not a guy's getting taken out legally or illegally at second base. I mean, call it and live with it. Nellie, you were down in Iowa City last weekend for the Olympic wrestling trials. Unfortunately, the biggest story is not necessarily a positive one. Tony Ramos is not very happy with Tom Brands, who apparently didn't support Tony the way Tony felt like he should have been supported. I think a lot of that has to be just the emotion coming out of Tony when you work as hard, pour your blood, sweat, and tears into something, a dream like making an Olympic team as he did, and then see it all fall apart. You're bound to be a little bit emotional. I mean, how serious is this little rift between those two?
After Sunday when it happened, it seemed more serious, but look back, I think it was totally out of Tony Ramos' character, because he's always been a stand-up guy. I was talking to the guys earlier today. There was about 4 years ago, he was in the national finals against Logan Stever, who went on to win 4 national titles. And early in the match, he had Logan on his back, and there's video proof of him that he was pinned, and they didn't call it. And he went on and lost the match by 2 or 3 points. It was really close, and he met with the media right away after. He stood up, hey, you can't, they didn't call it. I needed to go on and finish the match and win the match. I didn't do that. And he stood up and he took it. And that was at that point was the biggest stage. He had never won. He'd been an All-American. He'd never won a national title. And he's always been that way. And, I think it was right. The Olympics is the biggest thing. They have world championships every year, and he's wrestled in those. But the Olympics is the thing. It's a 4-year cycle. You get one shot at it every 4 years. You probably got a shot at 2 Olympics, maybe 3 at most. And I think, he'd been the #1 guy. He was a little upset, and it had been simmering, I think, for a while that Daniel Dennis came back and was in the room with him, and he had towed the line for Iowa. He had spoke the Iowa thing for since he graduated 2 years ago. He'd been the Iowa guy and had been the face of the Iowa and the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. And then to bring Daniel Dennis in, which is totally perfectly fine. That's the way that Hawkeye Wrestling Club has always been, is bring the best guys in, and iron sharpens iron. And I think it was the heat of the moment. I really do. I think the disappointment of losing, and he lashed out with maybe some things that he'd been thinking that were a slight against him. And I think they'll mend fences somehow, because I think Tony Ramos needs to be part of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club.
Yeah, it's really just unfortunate that they both happen to be at the same weight and looking for the same type of support from Brands and his staff. The interesting thing was that Ramos did say that Terry Brands was totally supportive of him, and he just didn't feel the same about Tom. So
yeah, it was a really surreal situation, because we just thought we were going to get the stand-up Tony Ramos when we went in to get the interview with him, and then that happened, and then we got Tom like 35 minutes later, and he had no idea what was going on until 5 minutes before we got him to talk. I think Tom Lord's words said that he felt ambushed.
all right, a couple more things. Nick, you got a chance to see Wartburg play baseball on Saturday. I think they got a pretty good team up there. What was your impression?
Yeah, it's a really good doubleheader, actually. They're playing Buena Vista. Both teams were undefeated in the conference at the time. And the thing with Wartburg is they have 4 strong starting pitchers, and the way they schedule games in the Iowa Conference, you're playing back-to-back doubleheaders. So you need starters that can go deep in games and give your team a chance. And they've had the pitching all year. I think the highest ERA out of their 4 starters was .225. So they know they're going to get those outings, and now the bats are starting to come around, and they have a lot of momentum going. I think they ended up taking 3 out of 4 from Buena Vista, so they're alone atop the league standings, and it looks like a complete team. They made some great plays in the field as well, and yeah, it's going to be a fun group to watch to see what they're capable of.
And you got to see Joel Holst, Wartburg's head coach, get ejected from a game.
And I guess as I understand it, that's the first time he's ever been ejected from a home game. I think there was a couple calls that he didn't agree with, and there was a play over at first base, 1-1 game, 6th inning. It was a great game, and I think that kind of lit a fire in the guys, because after that, the runner that was called safe controversially was thrown out at second base, and then they go and score a few runs in the bottom of the frame and win the game.
Yep, good stuff. That's a special day. You should mark on your calendar. My son played baseball up there for 4 years, and I never saw Coach Holst get tossed, so that was the landmark day.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time out there, so I think he was working on it, that's for sure.
All right, last thing I wanted to touch on, the Blackhawks playoffs start Friday night in Lincoln. Coach, General Manager and Coach P.K. O'Hanley made some moves 3/4 of the way through the season that paid some dividends. I mean, he got Sam McCormick and Ryan Lowen and Zach Yan, and those guys have made a significant contribution, and they got into the playoffs, finished strong. Now, can this team make a run at the Clark Cup?
I truly believe so, because I think the USHL East is wide open. And the seeding, I don't think really matters. It's going to be real interesting. They split their 4 games with Lincoln, who they start with. All 4 games were 1-goal games. And each team won at the other opposing team's arena. So I think it's going to be a great series. Tri-City and Sioux Falls are another one. I think Waterloo's series with those 2 teams was very similar. Close. They split almost all the matches, or all the games. What I call them matches. Too much soccer. But they split all the games with those 4 teams. I think it's wide. I think they can make a run. I think those moves really strengthen this team. They can score goals in bunches. They got to stay away from these freak injuries they keep on having. And they rested some guys on Saturday. PK didn't say that was taking the foot off the pedal there. It was just they still expected to win that game, but he rested some guys, and he said those guys were tired, and he wanted to give them. So they're going to be fresh to go this week. I think they're going to be as healthy as they have been. They got a great #1 goalie in Cale Morris, and then, like I said, McCormick and Lowen and Yan, and then you have Nick Swaney and God, I'm gonna miss it. But they got 3 lines they can run out there that are gonna
Right.
score points, and that's, when you get to this level and you consistently have scoring threats.
And we know Morris is a big game goaltender. I mean, he can get hot and carry them for a long way in the playoffs. The one thing I wonder about is if they get through the East, they've not had a lot of success against those top teams in the West, particularly Cedar Rapids and even Dubuque. And then there's Green Bay in there too, and
Yeah.
I mean, the West is loaded.
Yeah, the West is loaded. I tell you what, here's the similarities about this. I think this is the same conversation back 2002, 2003, and 2004. Blackhawks won the Clark Cup playoffs that year, and that team, the West, or I can't remember if it was East or West. They might have been in the West last year, it was the East. So anyway, everybody considered the West far superior to the East, and the Blackhawks pull it out in 4 games, I believe, over Tri-City. So it's very similar, because back then the 4 teams in that West division were loaded, and the East, nobody thought the East had a chance to win the Clark Cup, and Waterloo went in there. So I think this Waterloo team could do it. You know, you get right there. Playoffs is different. Kids get tight. Some kids get tired. There's key injuries. You know, Cedar Rapids was missing their #1 goalie on the last Friday when they played here, and I don't know the extent of his injury. So, but they had to bring in an emergency goalie, and then his backup actually played 2 really good games over the weekend. Cedar Rapids won both their games last weekend. So it's interesting. But yeah, you're right. The Cedar Rapids, the Buttes, the Green Bays, that's going to be those guys are going to have to survive. That's going to be a war on that side.
Well, fortunately, they have to play each other first, so they'll knock each other off, and then we'll get down to one of them, and then in a 7-game series, anything can happen.
Yeah. So it'll be real interesting.
It'll be fun. All right, that's it for us today. It looks like it's going to be a great week weather-wise finally, so our sports teams will be out and about and in action everywhere. If you can't get out and see your favorite teams, you can keep up with all the action in our print editions or at WCFcourier.com, and we'll be back and talk some more next week.